It's been 20 some odd years that IPv6 has been in existence, but hasn't been thoroughly implemented. It's been heavily tested over 20 plus years. And over these 20 plus years, it's been redesigned and modified and improved based on IPv4 problems. So based on what we've learned over the last 20 years about IPv4, we have ensured that we don't fall into the same traps as with IPv6. So what are the benefits of IPv6? Well, right off the bat, we have a larger address space. Well, why do we care about a larger address space? Well, with IPv4, we ran out of IPv4 addresses. There's only 4.2 billion possible IPv4 addresses. And you might be saying, well, that's an awful lot of IPv4 addresses. Yeah, it is. But considering the population of the world right now, which is about 7 billion, that's not even enough addresses for every single user on the planet. And then again, not every single person on the planet's connected, but we have already limited ourselves based on the number of individuals on the planet. Not only that, the current existing individuals on the planet that require an IPv4 address want more than one. They want 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. For example, at home, you have an IPv4 address. At work, you're using a different IPv4 address. Aha, right? Even though you don't intend to, you have one at home, you have one at work, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 at home. Well, with IPv4, in order to accomplish that, we're using network address translation. It's the only way we're getting away with that. So we want to get rid of network address translation. We want to give everybody the chance to have their own IPv6 address or more than one IPv6 address. So instead of a 32-bit address space, we have 128 bits for our address space. So it's 4 times the size. 4 times the size in bits. But remember, when we're dealing with binary bits, we're dealing in powers of 2. So that gives us a grand total of 3.4 times 10 to the 38 IP addresses. Now, if you're at all familiar with the terms like million and billion here, so 4.2 billion, then you got trillion, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, eventually, you get to something known as undecillion. Undecillion. Now, what is undecillion? Well, decillion would be 10. So if you're dealing with billion, so million, and then billion, and then trillion, and then I think it's quadrillion. I don't even know all of them, but quadrillion would be 4. So if decillion is 10, so then you got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 11. Undecillion's 11. That's a ridiculous number. See, words like that to describe something like undecillion, right? It blows your mind. That's what it does. And we have 3 to the power 4 times 10 to the 38. Go ahead and figure that out. The number's huge. Absolutely ridiculously huge. Enough to essentially right now give every single person on the planet that's in existence right now approximately 5,000 IPv6 addresses each. Each. It's a lot. It's a lot. Each. None of us need 5,000 IPv6 addresses each. Even with the projection of the number of people on the planet by, the year 2100, which should be doubled to about 16 million people on the planet. Well, that's still going to give everybody approximately 2,500 IPv6 addresses each. So the odds of running out here, very, very slim. The odds are running out very, very slim. Now, my numbers, might not be hyper accurate right now, but I'm just giving you examples here of, what size is this? It's massive. Whereas you have trouble as a company getting one IPv4 address, it's really easy to get you tons and tons and tons and tons of addresses. Ridiculous numbers of addresses without a problem whatsoever. Now, we say addresses. You know what? Let me back up on that. I said addresses, 5,000 IPv6 addresses. No, I got to rephrase that. Because now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually 5,000 networks. And each one of those networks can support 2 to the power of 64 addresses. So 5,000 times 2 to the power of 64 right now is pretty much how much each individual could have. That's more like it. That's more like it. So now that is even bigger. So yeah, my original number, I was thinking about it, that's not right. That's still not big enough for my calculations. It's actually 5,000 networks that each person could have with 2 to the power of 64 devices in each of those networks. That's how many there are. So by 2100, you end up with approximately with doubling the population, 2,500 networks for each individual user, each supporting 2 to the power of 64 addresses. Now that is big. That is big. So thank you for allowing me to correct myself, because I'm trying to describe how big this is. And it's so difficult when these numbers, 3.4 times 10 to the 38, is not something that you can see. It's not something that you can picture. Where I understand 4.2 billion, whew, that's a hard number to see, a hard number to describe, a hard number to look at. But if you're struggling to understand what I've said, just remember, this is big. That's really all you need to remember. It's huge. And we definitely will not run out of IPv6 addresses by the year 2100. That's a long time. That's a long time. Simpler header. With IPv4, the header was bloated. And at the time, we didn't consider it bloated when we created IPv4 and the network layer, and we put the packet header information in there. So at layer 3, we have a simpler header for IPv6. Now, I'm not saying it's a smaller header. The header is actually bigger. Why? Because we got to support addressing of 128 bits in length, a source address and a destination address. So it is bigger, but it's simpler, meaning there's less fields in it that have to be analyzed, processed, and looked at. So much more efficient routing, much more efficient decision-making processes when we're dealing with IPv6 packets that are being forwarded. Security and mobility. All right, we have security and mobility in IPv4, but it was an afterthought. Right? So security and mobility was baked into IPv4 or added to IPv4 after the thought. Whereas with IPv6, we know that security and mobility is needed. So all of that has been designed into IPv6 so it can be utilized and function with IPv6 seamlessly with as little headaches as possible. And then we also have transition richness. Now, I'm not going to say that's a benefit of IPv6. What that does for us is it ensures that it's easier for us to transition. So for example, we can run IPv4 and IPv6 on the same device at the exact same time. And the IPv4 communication is not going to interfere with the IPv6 communication. So if you start having certain portions of your network that are IPv6 and leaving other portions as IPv4, you can slowly make that change from a little bit from IPv4 to IPv6 as necessary. And you're not going to have to worry about completely rehauling your whole network at one point in time or one weekend and then flip the switch on Monday morning. You can incrementally upgrade the entire network because you can run your devices dual stacked. Every device nowadays is dual stack capable, IPv4 and IPv6 running on at the exact same time. We also have tunneling techniques in place whereby you can take IPv6 packets and tunnel them across IPv4 networks so that way there they can reach other IPv6 networks elsewhere. So if you have headquarters that's running IPv6 and you have branch office that's running IPv6, but your service provider or the internet still IPv4, well, you can tunnel your packets, your IPv6 packets, over the WAN or over the internet between your different sites without any worries. Or maybe you have the core of your network still as IPv4, but you have other portions that are IPv6. Well, then you can tunnel from the other portions of your network through the core, so on and so forth. What might be the other reason? Oh, you have resources that are still IPv4 resources, but you have users using IPv6. Well, you can have a transition there to ensure that, or a translation, ensure that your IPv6 packets can communicate over in the IPv4 network and vice versa. So there's a lot of options in play right now to allow you to have both an IPv4 network and an IPv6 network running at the same time. So transition richness, really big deal with IPv6. So that way there we can incrementally make that change over to IPv6.